Hey guys, it's Hannah, and I'm back with another joke of the day. Today's joke is, what is a ghost's favorite dessert? Stay tuned to the end of the video to find the answer.
Okay. All right, so we're going to talk today about electricity, the effects of moving charges and current and things like that. So first we're going to talk about what causes atoms to have a positive or negative charge. So if you think back, we talked about atoms having a nucleus with protons and neutrons inside of there. And then out in this cloud around the nucleus of an atom, they have electrons. And so in most elements are going to want to have the same number of protons with a positive charge. They have electrons with a negative charge to where they balance. When an atom gains or loses those electrons, it ends up with a positive or negative charge. So if it has extra electrons, it ends up with a negative charge. If it has extra protons, it ends up with a positive charge. And so that's how atoms gain or lose charge. They can do that through several different ways. We're going to talk, though, about electricity and that current, and what you might have heard about electrical current and wires and things like that. Current is just the flow of electrons from one place to another. So you see electrical current through your wires in the wall. Lightning, when it shoots down from a cloud down to the earth, that's a flow of electrons from the clouds to the earth. When you shuffle your feet on the carpet and zap the kid next to you, you're moving electrons from yourself to them and balancing those charges. So current is just the flow of electrons from one place to another. Okay, so we're also going to talk about, when we're talking about electricity, we're going to talk about things called conductors. A conductor is a material that lets those electrons flow through it easily. And so that would be the things that like wire is made out of, like copper or aluminum. So those things are going to allow things to flow easily. Coincidentally, most things that allow electricity to flow easily are the same things that we talked about as conductors that will let heat flow easily, metals and things like that. Copper, you would have copper pots and aluminum pots, pans, things like that. Those are also excellent conductors of electricity. So they make wires out of those. So those are conductors, things that let electricity flow through them easily. Then you have things that don't let electricity flow through them easily, and those are called resistors. And there are varying degrees. There are some things that resist flow of current more than others. And then there are certain types of things that let no electricity flow through them, and those are insulators. So if you think about wires, like the plug that you've got, plugged into my computer here, it has wires inside of it, but it's also wrapped in rubber or plastic, and those are insulators. They don't let electricity flow through them at all, and so they prevent that. So they keep us from getting shocked, keep us safe, and other insulators are glass and wood and things like that. And so, quick review. This has been a real short video. Quick review, though. Electrons moving from one place to another is current, and then those atoms gain or lose electrons, and that's how they get a positive or negative charge. And then conductors allow the flow electricity to flow easily through them. That'd be like metals, typically like copper or steel or aluminum, but also salt water is a good conductor of electricity. Resistor is a material that resists the flow of electricity, and an insulator completely stops flow of electricity. It'd be like cloth, cotton cloth, or rubber or plastic. All right, I'm going to bring Hannah back up to give you the answer to the joke of the day. We'll see you guys next time.
So, what is a ghost's favorite dessert? Ice cream.
Okay, guys, we're back for another social studies lesson.
You forgot something. Joke of the day. Today's joke is, why was the pony sent to detention? I'll tell you at the end of this social studies lesson.
Thanks, Hannah. Okay, well, bear with me through this lesson to get to Hannah's joke. I know that you guys are probably only tuning in for the joke of the day, but let's get through the social studies lesson so you can get to the answer. So we talked about in the past social studies lessons about the beginnings of our new country and setting up a form of government, the law of the land, called the Articles of Confederation, and it was just not a good good government. It didn't have enough power for the central government to do the things it needed to do, and it just was a weak form of government. So they got some delegates from each state got together in 1787 in Philadelphia, and they had a meeting, and their goal was to fix the Articles of Confederation. They didn't actually. Well, what they ended up doing was scrapping the Articles of Confederation entirely and writing the Constitution. So this gathering was going to end up being called the Constitutional Convention. They didn't call it that at first because they didn't go there to write a constitution. They went there to fix the Articles of Confederation. When they decided it wasn't worth fixing, then they wrote a whole new constitution, and it later became known as the Constitutional Convention. So what was the whole point of the Constitutional Convention? It was actually to fix the Articles of Confederation, but they didn't do that. So delegates from each state got together, and a lot of them were the same guys who wrote the Declaration of Independence and did that several years before. One of those guys, a guy named James Madison, his role in the whole thing was just as a key legislator, and he was important in that facet, but his main thing that he did for us at that Constitutional Convention was to write down just about every single thing everybody said, and his notes of those Constitutional Convention is the most complete record of what we have, our most complete record of those things that happened at that Constitutional Convention. So that was a big deal, and he said that trying to write all of that stuff down in his words nearly killed him. And you can imagine trying to write down every word of every debate that happened in a big deal like that. So they got together and they were debating how to set up a whole new constitution. And you had big states like Virginia that wanted to have representatives in government determined by the state size, the population of the state, not the size of the state on the map, but rather the population of the state. And that was the Virginia plan. Then you had people from smaller states like New Jersey that wanted I pointed here when I was talking about the Virginia plan. I do know that that's Texas, not Virginia. Virginia is up here, right in this area. Here, that's Virginia. And that's New Jersey. New Jersey was a small state. Sorry, back on track. New Jersey was a small state, and they thought, rather than having the state's population determine the number of representatives in government, that every state ought to have the same number of representatives. And they debated back and forth on that until they decided they were going to compromise. A compromise is just an agreement where one side gives up a little something to gain something, and the other side gives up a little something to gain something. And so they came up to what was called the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise, basically, both people got their way. The Virginia plan people got their way, that we have a part of government in our legislative branch, the House of Representatives, which is the number of people in the House of Representatives from each state is determined by the state's population. So a state like Kansas doesn't have as many people in it as a state like California. And so California has more representatives in our House of Representatives than does Kansas. So they got their way, but also the New Jersey plan people got their way. We have a Congress where each state has equal number of representatives from each state. And so that was the Great Compromise. And the next thing that they talked about was the 3/5 Compromise. States down in the South had more slaves in them than states up in the North. And so they couldn't get together on how to count those slaves for population numbers for representatives in government. And so what they came up with in this 3/5 Compromise was that 3 out of every 5 slaves would be counted, from each state would be counted toward the population of that state for representation in government. So if a slave owner owned 50 slaves, they would only count 30 of them as population of that state. So not counting people as whole people, that's not a good practice. And people who voted for it didn't even like it necessarily. And later on, not that long later, it will be struck down in our, would be struck down in Congress, but in our government. But to get it signed and get it passed, they compromised. 3/5 Compromise counted 3 out of every 5 slaves for the population of a state. Real quick about the 3 branches of government. We talked about the legislative branch just now, which has 2 parts: the Congress, which has equal representatives from each state, and House of Representatives, which has different number of representatives from each state determined by the state's population. So that's the legislative branch. They make the laws. Then we have the executive branch, which is the president. Their job is to enforce the laws. And then they have the judicial branch, which on a national level is the Supreme Court. And their job is to determine if the laws are fair. And so, no one branch is the most powerful branch. The Supreme Court can strike down laws that the legislative branch has made. The president doesn't have to sign them. If the president and the legislative branch sign them and put something into power, then the Supreme Court can still strike it down. Each one of them has co-equal power. And so, so that's kind of wrapping it up. Quick review. James Madison, important as a representative in the Constitutional Convention, but because of the notes he took in his record of what happened. What was the point of the Constitutional Convention? It was really to fix the Articles of Confederation. 3/5 compromise counted 3 out of every 5 slaves toward the population of a state. And the Great Compromise was a compromise between the Virginia plan from the big states and the New Jersey plan for the small states that allowed each state to have fair representation in government. Okay, hands coming back. You guys have a great day. We'll see you later.
So why was the pony sent to detention? He was horsing around. Hey guys, it's Hannah, and I'm back with another joke of the day. Today's joke is, what do you call a worm with no teeth? Stay tuned to the end of the video to find the answer.
Okay, so we talked in the last science lesson on day 11, I believe, on your Monday, about current and electricity and the flow of electricity and some conductors and insulators and stuff. So conductors are things that let electricity flow easily, and insulators are things that resist the flow of electricity, and insulators are things that completely stop that flow of electricity. So today we're going to talk about things called simple circuits and circuit diagrams. So a circuit is just a path that electricity can flow in. Your house is made up of complex circuits, and we'll talk about that next time. But the simple circuits are just an easy path that electricity can flow through. And so there are parts of a simple circuit, several main parts. First part's a battery or some kind of source of energy. Typically, and something you could build easily, it'd be a battery. Then you have conductors, so wires. You have insulators that are wrapped around the wires, the plastic or rubber coating. Then you have resistors. And we talked about resistors are things that resist the flow of electricity. Well, resistors do that in a simple circuit, but they also often change the form. So that's the purpose of a resistor in a simple circuit, is to change the form of energy from electric energy to maybe light energy. So a light bulb is an example of a resistor in a simple circuit, or a bell or a buzzer would change that electrical energy into mechanical energy or sound energy. So we have batteries, we have conductors, we have insulators, we have resistors, and then an important part, and the last one we're going to talk about, is a switch. A switch is an important part of an electrical circuit, and a switch, when you open a switch, it breaks the flow of electricity and shuts off that circuit. So that's what happens when you flip the switch on the wall. It opens that circuit up, it breaks the circuit, and it stops the flow of electricity to that light bulb up there, and so it makes it dark. So once again, real quick, battery, insulators, conductors, resistors, and switches. Okay. So the other part we're going to talk about is a circuit diagram. Circuit diagram is just a special type of drawing that shows the parts of a circuit. So in a really simple one, you might just have a rectangle. You can look up some of these things. You can Google it and see a simple circuit diagram. And they have different symbols, and they're read almost exactly like this map back here with down here in the corner. Let me adjust this camera here. Down here in the corner, you would have a map key. Well, a circuit diagram is going to have that same thing. It's going to tell you what each one of those parts of a circuit are. And they're going to have special markings for that indicate wires and resistors and switches. So that's really all we have today. Simple circuits. Quick review of the whole thing, though, before we move on. Simple circuit. It would have a battery or a power source. You would have a conductor, which are wires. You'd have insulators, which are something that would stop that flow, like the plastic coating on the wires. You'd have resistors, which in this case might be a light bulb. That would be the point of the light bulb. The point of that resistor would be to change the electrical energy into another form of energy like light or sound or mechanical energy. And then you would have a switch, which when it is opened, it shuts off that flow of electricity to the resistor. So, and then a circuit diagram would be just a special drawing to show what the parts of the circuit are, almost like a map. So I'm going to bring Hannah back in to give you the answer to that joke of the day, and I'll see you next time to talk about complex circuits.
So what do you call a worm with no teeth? A gummy worm. Yummy. Okay. Hey everyone, it's Hannah, and I'm back with another joke of the day. Today's joke is, what day of the week does a potato look forward to the least? I'll be back with some more talk about potatoes after my dad talks about social studies.
Okay, she'll talk about potatoes, I'll talk about social studies. Fair deal. Okay, so we had talked about on lesson 12, I believe, for the Tuesday, about the Constitution being ratified, how they tried to fix the Articles of Confederation but decided we're going to have a Constitution and the debates and things, and eventually they did get that passed or ratified. Everybody signed on board, and they had the three branches of government: the legislative branch, which is the lawmaking branch; the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. They decide if the laws are fair, and then you have the executive branch, which is the president who enforces the laws. We needed to have a president. So they got together and they elected this guy that you've heard of named George Washington. They elected him president of the United States. He was our first president. He is the only president to be elected by unanimous vote. Every single person that voted for George Washington. It hasn't happened since and not likely to. So Washington takes over as first president. He realized this is going to be a tough job. Nobody's ever done it before. There's no precedent set. He's going to need some help. He figures he's a wise man, but he's going to bring in some other wise men to help him run this thing. And he divides up his responsibilities into departments. And so you have, for example, the Department of State, which would be dealing with other foreign countries and things like that. And he got a guy, you are familiar with him as well, guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State. That means he was the head of the State Department, and he dealt with the people from other countries and how things were going between the countries. Another department in the government is the Department of the Treasury that deals with money and things like that. And Alexander Hamilton was the head of the Department of the Treasury, the Secretary of the Treasury. And so dividing government up into these branches, Washington called that his cabinet, his group of people that helped him run the government. So the cabinet is just a group of people that help the president run the government, and made up by the different different departments, like the State Department or the Treasury Department. And so Washington gets those guys in there, and they set up and run the government, and it's going okay. People have different opinions, just like they do today, about how government should be run and if there should be big government or less government and things like that, just like we debate about today. And pretty soon you have these different people with different opinions grouping themselves off into different groups, just like we do today. And they just like now we call those political parties, and that's what they called them back then. And political parties is a group of people with similar ideas about how government should go. The first two political parties were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. The Federalists were led by Alexander Hamilton. They wanted big government, and the Democratic Republicans were led by Thomas Jefferson, and they wanted more limited government. And so that was the beginning of the new party, or the party system like we have today. George Washington was very much against it. He felt like it would tear the country apart, which you kind of see some of those things today. And George Washington, extremely wise man. Side note about Washington, they actually tried to make him king. He chose not to accept that. He didn't want to trade one king for another, but he did allow himself to be elected president. He went through twice and set that precedent as president only being elected twice. I think they would have probably kept electing him over and over again, but he just took that honor twice. So when he took over as president of the United States, we didn't have a capital city. They did the inauguration and he set up office in New York City. But they started work on the District of Columbia, Washington, and the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., like we have today. There was nothing there. It was actually a pretty cruddy area, low, swampy, mosquito-y, not a great place to build. Had a lot of work to be done in building a new city. They brought in a guy named Benjamin Banneker to help build that city. He was a city planner, was his job, so he laid out the city very much the way it is today. And Benjamin Banneker was actually the son of a former slave, kind of significant considering the way things go. He was an architect and an engineer, and he was able to help plan our city, our capital city. So, all right, that was a quick lesson, but I'm going to bring Hannah back. You guys, we got one more day this week, another science day, then we'll be through another week of this. Hope you guys have a great week. See you next time.
Back to potatoes. Okay, so what is a potato's least favorite day of the week? Friday. Hey guys, it's Hannah. It's Fun Fact Friday, so today's fun fact is an ostrich's egg weighs 3.5 pounds. And today's joke is, why was the computer cold? Stay tuned to the end of the video to find the answer.
Okay. 3.5 pound egg. That saved me a lot of cracking eggs when I'm making omelets, I guess. So on day 13, on Wednesday, we started with talking about some simple circuits, and we talked about the parts of a simple circuit with a battery or some kind of source of current. Talked about conductors, which are the wires. We talked about resistors, which change the flow of electricity or the electrical energy into light energy or sound energy. And we talked about switches, which open or close the circuit and allow electricity to flow or stop that flow of electricity. So we're going to talk today about a more complex type of circuit called a parallel circuit. The circuit we talked about before, a simplest type of circuit would be a series circuit. If you've ever had those Christmas lights, the less expensive type of Christmas lights that where one bulb goes out, then the whole string goes out. Then you have to go up and down the line, pulling out the bulb, putting in the bulb, pulling out the bulb, putting in the bulb, pulling out the bulb, putting in the bulb, until you find the right one that has caused the problem. That is a set of Christmas lights that's wired in a series. The electricity just has one path to flow, and when a light bulb burns out, it breaks that flow, almost like a switch shuts off the power, and then you have to go through and figure out which bulb caused that problem. So that really wouldn't work if you think about your house. Like, you don't want to have lights on in your house, and maybe the light bulb burns out in the kitchen, and all of the lights in your house go dark. It's not a very good setup. So we have different types of circuits called complex circuits, and then a type of that complex circuit is a parallel circuit. And a parallel circuit is just a circuit with multiple paths for the electricity to flow through before they get to the resistors. So, if that light bulb in your kitchen burns out, the electricity can still flow and get to the light bulb in your living room, your bathroom, or something like that. And so the flow of electricity through a complex circuit is not really any different than through a simple circuit. It just flows in multiple different ways. The circuit diagrams for a complex or parallel circuit are going to look pretty similar. They're just going to be a lot more to them. They're going to have the same types of markings as you would have on a circuit diagram for a simple circuit. And so, it's not much different. You just add different things. So if you think about Christmas lights, to wrap this part up, if you have a set of Christmas lights that is wired in parallel, a complex circuit, and one light bulb goes out, that electricity can still get to all the other lights. So that'd be a lot more convenient. Then you can see which bulb was out. The rest of the lights are still going. And they do cost more, though, because there's more wire. The last part we're going to talk about is electromagnets. An electromagnet is just a magnet created with the flow of electricity. And so you can make an electromagnet at home. Maybe you can try this. Pretty simple. Quick direction. You can look up a video on YouTube or directions on the internet. But basically, take a iron core, maybe a nail that you could find out in the shop or something, and you can take some copper or wire or any other type of conductor and wrap it around that wire or wrap it around that nail lot. Then you take the two ends of the wire and connect it to a battery, one end to each one end of the battery. And as that electricity starts to flow through the wire and around that nail or whatever other piece of iron you found, it will create an electromagnet, and a magnet that you can then pick things up and put things down with. The advantage of an electromagnet over a regular magnet is that you can turn the magnet off. So you think maybe a junkyard, they might have a huge magnet to pick up large piles of metal and move them from one place to the other. Not very convenient if the magnet picks them up, but then it doesn't ever set them down. You have to go and pull the individual parts off. It's not going to work very well. But if you can turn on the magnet, pick up junk, swing it over here, and turn off the magnet, and all the metal falls, well, that's pretty convenient. So you can shut off that electromagnet or turn it back on. You can change how strong an electromagnet is. You don't need an electromagnet in your house that's strong enough to pick up a car, maybe. And an electromagnet that you need to pick up a car needs to be pretty strong. And so there are two ways that you can increase the strength of an electromagnet. The first would be to increase the number of wraps of wire around that iron core. And then, of course, the second way would be to put more current through that wire to double the current, or whatever. You could double the current or not double it, but increase the flow of electricity through the wire. So quick review on that. Complex circuits, multiple paths for the electricity to flow, and that's a parallel circuit, is an example of a complex circuit. And electromagnets are magnets that are created with the flow of electricity, and you can increase that strength of the electromagnet by the number of adding to the number of wraps around the iron core, or by increasing the flow of electricity. All right, so I'm going to bring Hannah back on for your answer to your joke of the day. You guys have a great weekend.
So, why was the computer cold? Because he left the windows open.